Thank you all, and thank you, Ulrika, for introducing the series. I just want to put this poster up there for you to see, just to keep in mind the theme, which we've already heard a little bit about: commemoration, representation, and celebration. When we came up with this theme, I have to say, from the very beginning, the first thing I thought was we have to have someone talk about embassies. So we are indeed incredibly lucky to have someone who got up this morning and flew all the way across the country just to come here and do this lecture. That's a long commute. So we're very excited to hear from Sian Roberts about designing for diplomacy, representing the U.S. through diplomatic facilities abroad, as was said. So our speaker is Sian Roberts. Sian is an architect and a partner at the Miller-Hull Partnership in Seattle, Washington. A graduate of Haverford College and University of Washington, she spent more than 30 years at Miller-Hull, where she's led design teams for higher education academic buildings, as well as civic and infrastructure facilities for state and federal government clients. Her projects have won local and national AIA awards for design and sustainability. Of particular relevance for us and for this Arfaa lecture series theme, Sian has led the firm's projects with the State Department's Bureau of Overseas Buildings Operations for over a decade. Like Sian, I too am a graduate of the University of Washington, and while I was there, I heard endless praise and was quite inspired by the work of Miller-Hull. So I'm very, very pleased to introduce Sian Roberts tonight. The title you see there, without further ado, welcome to the podium.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I always love coming to Philadelphia. A little conflicted today. If you don't know, today was our Super Bowl parade, and so I didn't have to miss that to be here. But any Hawks fans? All right, thank you. So yeah, didn't have to miss that, but I'm happy to be here. And it's a really nice opportunity actually for me to reflect. We've been doing this work for the last 13 years now. It's a really nice opportunity to just sit back and reflect on the work that we've been doing and think about the bigger themes. You get so mired in the day-to-day, so it's good to kind of step back and think about what we've been doing. So, I went to Haverford College, and after Haverford College, I was, while I was there, I was fortunate to take a design studio with Danielle Voigt, and she was incredibly generous and offered me a job afterwards. So, right out of school, I worked for Acton Voigt and Associates. They did these unbelievably beautiful Beaux-Arts watercolor renderings back in the day, and if you ever got a chance to go to Voigt McTavish's offices, these are framed, they're enormous, they're just gorgeous. And while I was there, my sort of work buddy was a guy named Michael Pearson, who is the thesis prize here at Drexel. He was a very proud graduate of Drexel, a really talented young man. And the thesis prize here was named after him. So very much of a kind of a feeling of homecoming here for me today. And again, thank you for inviting me. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to go through kind of a little bit about Miller-Hull, how we ended up doing this work. I'm going to do a rapid-fire history lesson on embassy design for U.S. embassies in particular, and then I'm going to go through 4 of our projects, and we'll see how much time we have, or maybe 3, I don't know. I promise I won't keep you here too long. Okay, so left Seattle, went to the Pacific Northwest, where I went to the University of Washington and was sort of steeped in this tradition of Northwest modernism. And you can see very heavily influenced by the materiality and the light, kind of, or lack thereof, I guess, in the Northwest. You see the big panes of glass to bring all that light in. And also really influenced by our very close cultural connection to the Far East, and Japan in particular, and Japanese architecture and design. While I was at the university there, I was able to convince Dave Miller to be my thesis chair, so I considered that to be a coup. Dave and Bob were kind of the hot young designers in Seattle doing really the best and most innovative work at the time. And so I was able to get a job with them. You can see this work very reminiscent of Northwest modernism, kind of brought up to kind of a new generation. And I've been there for over 30 years, from intern to partner. My first project is actually suggests another one of the influences that Dave and Bob had at that time, and those were some of the work coming out of Europe, and that would be the really tectonic and systems expressive work. You know, think Renzo Piano, Richard Rogers, and also a high degree of sustainability that informs all of our work still to this day. And as I go through the embassy projects, you'll see how we are implementing some of those ideas in the work that we're doing across the globe. We started getting a little bit more attention. This was our first National Honor Award winner, a rural community college project in Washington State. And then that recognition led to our first GSA Design Excellence projects. This is a teeny tiny little border crossing in a place called Point Roberts. And it is actually, you have to go through Canada to get to this funny little peninsula. So you can see it's really teeny, but it certainly has an exuberant roof. And so that was our first GSA or federal project. Through the 2000s, we kept working on more kind of larger, complicated civic projects in and around the Northwest. And then culminating back with the GSA, we were hired to do the biggest border crossing in the world, actually, between San Diego and Tijuana. So this is the San Isidro border crossing, and this is really the project where we showed our chops in terms of understanding how to deal with things like security, complicated phasing. This entire project was phased and operational 24/7 while this was completely reconsidered. We relocated I-5, so very complicated, and also security being a high priority. This was really what kind of brought us to the door of the Bureau of Overseas Buildings Operations. I'm going to be using the three letters OBO, and this is who I mean when I say that. This is a bureau within the State Department that is responsible for all of their facilities overseas. So we ended up at their door. I'm going to give you just a little bit more terminology because we're going to make sure we don't get confused here. So an embassy is a diplomatic facility in a capital city. A consulate is a diplomatic facility that is not in a capital city. So any building, any diplomatic facility that is not in a capital city is called a consulate, and that gets confusing because there's also two primary functions for an embassy. There's a diplomatic function, and that is sort of the ambassador and all of the diplomats that are out there to try to make connections with the local politicians. And then there's the consular section, and that is the people that help people get visas, and they support U.S. Expats or people that happen to be in the country. So there's two different kind of components. Actually, there's more than that, but there's two major components, and sometimes that expresses itself throughout the building. So just a little bit of terminology before we move on. And now we get into our history lesson. So if you are a history buff and if you are at all interested in this, what I'm talking about tonight, this is the book for you. It's a book by a woman named Jane Loeffler. It's a really well-researched book that talks about the history of U.S. diplomatic facilities, how they were conceived, how they were built, what the politics behind it was. It's really well researched and fascinating. So I am going to refer to notes because this is history and I don't want to get it wrong. So let's see. One of the things I think that we learned over the years and that you will learn from reading this book is that the overarching mission of representing the U.S. abroad has really remained very consistent. But during that time, the design principles and priorities for these facilities abroad is very much impacted by the geopolitical situation and also, as a result, by our internal political situation as well. So diplomatic facilities are a really unique animal and a relatively recent project type. Diplomacy used to be a relatively informal affair when it came to buildings. A diplomat was typically a wealthy man of course, you might as well be honest about that one, who could afford to rent a large and well-appointed residence in a foreign country. And the staff was pretty minimal, so really that's all they needed, a big fancy house, basically. Imagine rich guy, big fancy house. Fun fact, Benjamin Franklin, local hero, was our first diplomat in France, and when he secured support for the American Revolution. So, let's move on to facilities. This is actually the first property that the U.S. government owned, and this is a legation in Tangiers, and it was gifted by the Moroccan government in 1821. So this is the first property that was owned. And so the next phase in U.S. diplomacy was really purchasing buildings abroad for the diplomats to be housed in. This here is an example of that. This was an embassy building in Paris. It was purchased in 1925. And around then, the Rogers Act combined the diplomatic service and the consular service into the U.S. Foreign Service. And so that is when embassies began to kind of combine both of these functions, diplomacy and consular services. And the Foreign Service Buildings Commission was created by the Foreign Services Building Act in 1926. So that was the first formal agency tasked with acquiring and constructing permanent diplomatic facilities. So this kind of went on for a while, until the post-war era, when there was just a big boom in construction. Obviously, America was, our profile was sort of expanding, and there was a big program of building embassies abroad. So in 1954, the Office of Foreign Buildings Operations, that's FBO, a precursor to OBO, was created to handle this wave of construction. And they began hiring world-renowned architects who used modern architecture to express and represent the openness of the U.S. And in 1961, John F. Kennedy said, and God, I wish I could do John F. Kennedy because this is a perfect quote. If I could do it, I would, but I don't want to make you suffer. So this quote is, "Now you have to involve yourselves in every element of foreign life if you are going to represent the United States powerfully and with strength and with vigor." And then in 1962, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a member of the Kennedy administration, issued the guiding principles for federal architecture. And these have been, by the way, guiding principles ever since. Number one, produce facilities that reflect the dignity, enterprise, vigor, and stability of the federal government. Number two, avoid official style, which is controversial sometimes. And number three, incorporate the work of living artists in public buildings. So this really was what we consider the heyday of U.S. diplomatic design, and produced some of the most iconic U.S. embassies, including this, the embassy in New Delhi by Edward Durrell Stone. We just recently had an addition. And the Athens Embassy by Walter Gropius. And this fascinating little building that I always love to look at, this little drum by John Johansson in 1964 with this sort of interesting kind of Celtic design. So there's quite a few of these. They're really beautiful, they're really interesting, they're very expressive buildings. But sadly, this era did come to an end. And that was following the 1983 Beirut embassy bombing. And an advisory panel published the Inman Report, which changed U.S. embassy design by emphasizing security over architectural openness, and they determined 126 posts that needed to be replaced. And then that was followed in 1998 by the East African bombings in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam. At that point, I think the U.S. government got really serious, and FBO was elevated to bureau status, and it became OBO in 2001 at the beginning of George Bush's presidency. And they were tasked with overseeing a $21 billion program to replace over 200 insecure facilities. And so this has really been going on since then. As you can imagine, 200 facilities taking a long time and many, many years. This has been a very ambitious program that has been happening at the State Department for the last 25 years. So when this first happened, however, the director at the time was looking for a very highly streamlined approach to be able to deliver a lot of these all at once. And so they created something called the Standard Embassy Design. And there was a small and a medium and a large. And depending on what the size of your post was, you got a small, a medium, or a large. They were all delivered with design build. They had things like standard windows, standard doors, and this continued through about probably 2008, 2009. I'm looking at Richard for a little confirmation. And so I'm going to show you an example of kind of how this happened or what this looked like. So this was the Accra Embassy by Harry Rees in 1964. This is part of kind of that era of, 50s, 60s, open diplomatic facilities. And then this was the replacement facility, the replacement opera facility, which was one of the standard embassy designs. So you can see kind of the pattern of very, very similar windows, very repetitive. These were often outside of town so that they could get a big enough parcel to be able to do this. And then just to show that they all did kind of look the same, this is the one in Lomé as well, delivered at about the same time. And so these facilities, you know, very secure, but you know, they lack that sort of representation of vigor, we might say. And so politicians and diplomats really began to take notice of this. And under the Obama administration, Secretary of State John Kerry said, "I cringe when I see what we're doing. We're building some of the ugliest embassies I've ever seen. We're building fortresses around the world. We're separating ourselves from the people in this country." And around the same time, the AIA got involved in 2009, and they put together a 21st Century Embassy Task Force, which published a report called Design for Diplomacy, which were called Moynihan's Guiding Principles. Interestingly, he comes back again. And it also recommended that OVO implement a design excellence program like the GSA had implemented. And basically what that means is selection of architects is based on lead design portfolio, not necessarily just sort of how many of these have you done before, so it's focused on design. Excuse me. And also that there would be peer reviews throughout design. So peer reviewers coming in with OVO to kind of critique and help advance the design, help OVO be better clients, basically. And so one of the first, if not maybe the first, which I don't know, I think it might be, maybe, the embassy's design with the new Design Excellence Program was a competition for the replacement for the London Embassy, won by your local friends here and our friends as well, here in Timberlake. So this was the original. As you can see, it's one of these mid-century embassies designed by Saarinen with this lovely, iconic, and I believe at the time somewhat controversial eagle here at the top of the building. And this time, rather than being replaced with an SED, it was replaced by this lovely building. That balances the need for security, so this meets all of the security standards that OVO requires, at the same time projecting that idea of transparency and openness and representing America the way we would want it to be represented. Okay, so now on to us. Okay, so in 2013, we received the first of 2 term contracts for the State Department with OVO, and all of these images are kind of the major projects that we have done since then. So we have been fortunate to design 7 new embassies or new consulates, along with a couple of renovations along the way. Many of them are in Africa, Mexico, or Central America. And before I get into it, I just want to say a little bit about our approach. And I think I introduced our firm to you just to give you a sense of what our sensibility is. We are really interested in place, and so kind of our regional approach to architecture in the Northwest. How do we take that beyond the Northwest? So we've been working outside of the Northwest for quite a while now, but in doing that, we really focus on trying to understand the place as well as we can, environmentally, because sustainability is obviously important to us, but also culturally, and landscape, ecosystems, that kind of thing. So we bring that to our approach to our embassy work. Obviously working for the US government and for the State Department, we need to balance that with an understanding that we are representing the United States. So we're not just sort of culturally building something that fits, we're building something that respects the local culture, but also represents the United States, our innovation, and being a model, I guess, for what the US can do abroad. So this was our first project. So Niamey is the capital city of Niger, so this is a new embassy in Niger. And this was very much of a hot spot when we started working on this. This was a friendly nation in the middle of a very unstable and increasingly unfriendly region. So you can see Niger is, if you didn't know where it is, it's on the south edge here of the Sahara Desert. So you can see the Sahara Desert with climate change kind of creeping down. 80% of Niger is the Sahara, but the capital city, Niamey, is right here, kind of on the southwest corner, right along the Niger River. The climate is hot, 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 but luckily in the summer is when the rainy season is, when it's hottest, and it's also when the rainy season is, so it tends to drop it down just a little bit. But you can see that they get a lot of rain in a short period of time, and so Niamey is, and Niger in general, are really, they are faced with many environmental issues. Drought in the summer, or drought in the winter, flooding in the summer, and then, of course, deforestation leading to lots of windstorms and dust storms. One of the best parts about working on these projects is we get to work with great landscape architects and we get to really understand the landscape and the flora of all these different places. So Niamey is basically on a savanna land, so you're below the Sahara, you're not in the sort of forested area, you're kind of in the dry, and it's the Sahel region. If you've heard of the Sahel, it's in the Sahel. Okay, so in the town of city of Niamey, this is the Niger River. So you can see the site is on a bluff above the river. It is surrounded by other embassies, French embassy on this side, Mali embassy on this side. This is where the chief of mission lives, and they get those great views, and taller buildings can have great views out over to the river. One thing I want to point out are all these trees here. There are some very special protected trees here, some baobabs, and there's also a lot of mature trees that we did our best to figure out how to keep. This is an existing facility, and so when I say new embassy, we built a new embassy right around all the areas that we could, and we left the existing embassy in place while we were building. So I talked about how we get to know a place. It's hard. You have a very limited amount of time. We do a lot of desktop research before we go out there, and then we have one crazy mad week where we just do everything. We go to tours, we look at stuff, we meet with people, we meet with local architects, we meet with the planning departments, we go to museums, we do everything we can to absorb the place as much as we can. So I'm going to show you a couple of slides here. At Niamey, one of the things we were struck by was just the color of the earth and the color of the walls. It was just like this incredibly rich, deep, beautiful color. And then also this metalwork. This is just primer, basically. It's unpainted, primed metalwork, but they were clearly artisans out there doing some really nice, interesting, beautiful work with that primer color. And then, of course, thatch roofs and all of these mud walls. And then, of course, just the absolutely beautiful textiles in West Africa, all these great, bright colors that really influenced our interior design as we moved along further. Shade is really, really important, so we looked at a lot of shade precedents, both modern and vernacular. And then here's how the plan ended up. So this is kind of the building. A couple things I'll point you to. One is right here. This is the main entry. And this is that baobab tree we were talking about. And here is where we've created a courtyard. They had a courtyard. They loved it. We wanted to recreate the courtyard. So we created a courtyard that you could access from the main gathering space in the building. I'm going to talk about sustainability for a minute. So this city has very inconsistent infrastructure. And this is an issue we came across in Africa quite a bit. And it was, in a way, it was a great opportunity because it sort of demanded that OBO really think differently about how they deliver services to a site. So as an example, on this site, the power was very inconsistent. The generators were cycling on maybe 2 or 3 times a day. There was water. There was water that needed to be treated. So water was piped to the site, but we needed to treat it because it was very poor quality, and there was no sanitary sewer system, and the stormwater, as I mentioned with the flooding, is a real issue. So from a water side, one of the things we did was create our landscape plan such that it could catch the water during the rainy season as much as we possibly could, and have these landscape areas that could handle the water in the wet season, and they could kind of dry out during the dry season. And then we limited our irrigation to these green areas. We kept the smallest lawn that we possibly could, because they like to have their lawns, so they can have their flag raisings and their ceremonies, so we tried to keep that as small as possible. And then kept that ornamental landscaping towards the more formal areas. And in doing that, we were able to, well, actually, one more component of our water story is that because there was no sanitary sewer system, and OBO does this a lot, they treat all of the sanitary sewer to Class A standards. And so there's a water treatment plant on site that treats water to potable standards. We use that for irrigation. So more consistent water over the year. If we tried to build a big cistern, it would have been ridiculous because they get all their water at once and it wouldn't have lasted for the dry season. So this is like every day you get a little bit of water. So we were able to deliver 87% of the water needed for irrigation through the wastewater system. And then we optimized our use of PVs, and recently they put in a new battery system. So basically, over 50% of the electricity delivered to this location is through the photovoltaics. And then what the batteries do is it allows them to be able to utilize the batteries during the peak load times and to charge them during the non-peak loads. And so by being able to operate with the batteries and the PVs, they're able to reduce their use of generators by 95%. So all of that, a lot of these facilities are heavily dependent on generator fuel, and that, if you notice, it's a landlocked country. Getting fuel to these locations can be a challenge. Okay, so now the big picture part. So this is the resulting facility. You can see that we took the idea of those walls, we took that metal panel color, and we created lots and lots of shade around the building here. This is our great baobab tree right here that welcomes you as you enter the site. Our drive kind of works its way around that baobab tree. Shade in and around. This is the outdoor courtyard that I mentioned. One other thing to note, these women here obviously are locals, and so these facilities, you think about them as being for diplomats, but really the vast majority of the people who work there are locally employed staff. So understanding their cultural needs, be it religious cultural needs, those kinds of things, it's really important to understand what they're going to need as well, and not just design this for the U.S. diplomats. And this opens right out to, here, this is the main entry here, right before you hit the security to go into the building. And this is that gallery space. We weren't quite done when we took this picture, but anyway, this is the gallery space. And one thing to note here is some of the artwork you see being installed right here. They have a really amazing art and embassies program. Every one of their projects has some really, really great installations. So if they post books on them, and they take it very seriously, and it is a great program. Okay, I'm going to move to Mexico. Let's see what time it is. Okay, so we're moving on to Guadalajara. And so the issue with Guadalajara is it is a very, very heavy consular load. So this is this is pre-Trump's second term. They were getting 2,400 consular visitors a day. So that's a lot of people. And the existing facility was in the middle of town, and people come to this visa appointment. They're coming from a very long way away. They might come hours and hours early. They might bring their whole families with them, and they're all waiting on the sidewalk right around the facility. And it was really a problem for the neighborhood. It was also a problem for those people because there were all these fraudsters that would come and kind of, sell them things they didn't need, all sorts of things like that. So it was not a good situation. So the U.S. government started looking for locations where they could do this differently. And so again, location, Guadalajara is in the state of Jalisco, right here in Mexico, just northwest of Mexico City. And near Lake Chapala, and the reason I mention that is that there's a lot of expats that live there, and so the consular load is not only all the people wanting to get their visas, but it's also people like Social Security services for expat United States citizens. So here we are in the city, Guadalajara. The site they found was right on the edge, which is kind of par for the course. That seems to be what they're able to do these days. And you'll notice on the left we've got this big forest, and on the right, this Oblatos Canyon. This whole Canyonlands thing is absolutely really spectacular. So here's an image of that area here, and you can see we're starting to think about like, where do we start? How do we start to use some of this to inform maybe what our interior palettes might look like? Landscape, again, these great cactuses and agaves. And then what they like to say in Guadalajara, I don't know if they say this in every country or every city in Mexico, but they like to say that anything that you think of when you think of Mexico is really all about Guadalajara, right? So it is a cultural center for sure, and it is where mariachi bands, for instance, originated. And so it is a really, really rich cultural place, and lots of great, brilliant, bright colors to boot. Lovely climate, actually. All you need is a little bit of shade, otherwise it's really quite lovely. It's hot, the elevation is quite high, so it keeps it's relatively cool. I mean, it gets up into the 90s, but it's not brutal like me in May. So really, we did focus on trying to have shade. So one thing I'm gonna, okay, here's the site. So you can see it's kind of on the edge of town, and it's an old hacienda. And you can see, again, there'll be a common theme, some mature trees there, lovely little forested area that we worked hard to be able to maintain. So one of the great things about working for OBO and the Design Excellence Program is they make you start every project with 3 concepts. It's like being back in school again. You get to do 3 concepts, they have to be really different and they have to be unique, and you show them to the peer reviewers in OBO and you have a great dialogue and you all decide which one you want to do, and hopefully it's the one you want to. Not always, but hopefully. So I'm not going to show you this for everyone, but I'm going to show you this for this, just so you can kind of see what you learn out of this process and how we were able to utilize the process to really drive this where it needed to go. So the 3 concepts, they've got nice, clever names, and they definitely have some aesthetic qualities to them that are related to the name that we've given them, but really functionally, they're all about what to do with this big consulate that I was telling you about. How do we put all the consular visitors? So our first option was, because there's a lot of stuff that has to go on the first floor of a consular anyway, and then you put all the consulate load, that 2,400 people a day, all of a sudden you have this huge first floor, and it starts to look like a pancake, and you've got well, we call it a table and a tower, right? And then this became, as we thought about how can we make that look like anything, we were struck by kind of the arcades in the region and thought, well, we could do something like this maybe. So this was our arcade concept. This is how it looked in 3D. One thing you'll notice is that it takes up a lot of the site. There's not a lot left for things like future growth. We also are right up against the property line here. And one of the things we were trying to do was create some area out front that was not sidewalk where people could wait. So this was the Palapa, and on this one we were like, hey, let's go ahead and put the consular on the 2nd floor. It would be great. They can be elevated up. They can look out at the trees and the city beyond. Well, we might need an escalator because there's so many people, and OBO was like, we don't do consulars on the 2nd floor. It's just not done. So, we said okay, but bringing these 3 concepts to them really helped them understand what the implications were, because we were able to do a lot with this concept. And so, that we were able to express that consular up on the 2nd floor. And then on top of that, we were able to create this great little garden, another sort of protected outdoor space for the diplomats doing their daily work. And that's how it looked in the concept. And then right in front here is where we were able to capture some space for the visitors. And then lastly was something we called the portico, and this was split the consular and use that 2-story here as like a big, entryway, kind of visibility into the consulate as you enter the space. And so that's what that looked like. So here were the three, we debated and discussed, and ultimately we were able to kind of come to an agreement that we thought that the Palapa really had the best, was making the best use of the site. And so then we got into all sorts of discussions with the operations folks about, okay, are we going to have an escalator? If we have an escalator, who's going to repair it? On and on. And so this opened a little while ago, probably about a year ago now. And this whole area here is a plaza that's above a parking garage, and that is where people can come and wait before they go through the security into the consular. So their appointment isn't yet, they've got their family with them, they can all hang out here. This is a very fancy neighborhood, I forgot to mention that. They were not happy about the consulate coming to their neighborhood. And so the ability to be able to say, hey, we have a plan, we're going to keep these people off the street, they're not going to bother you, was important. And that's looking in to see this, it's closed right now, the consulate's closed, but when that gate is open, people are free to kind of go through and hang out here before they go through that security gate there. And then here you've gone through the security gate, you can see all the windows up there, and you can see the hint of the escalator that's going to take you up. Lots of consular windows, that's only one row, there's a whole other row over there. And this picture is taken from that grove of trees with some understory. We're bringing some understory cactuses and local plantings under there. This is inside for the diplomats, their way to get in and up to their spaces. We always try to put a really welcoming stair in so that people don't take the elevator. It's good for your health to take the stairs. So if there's one that looks good, that helps. And then this is that outdoor space that the diplomats can use, or staff can use, looking out here over the trees and into the city. Okay, back to the African continent. See how we're doing? Good, okay. Okay, this is Casablanca on the Atlantic Ocean. Let's see. Casablanca is really very Mediterranean. If you've been, it really feels kind of like Italy almost, at least climate-wise and vegetation-wise. There's the Atlas Mountains here that are tall enough that you can ski, by the way, in Morocco. I don't know if you knew that. I didn't know that, but you can ski in Morocco. And then on the other side of the mountains is where you drop back into the Sahara Desert. Yeah, climate actually kind of, Mediterranean, not bad. This is the old town here. So this is the old town with the major mosque here that is new, relatively new. You can see it's a built-up city. It's a real city. Lots of the traditional form, these courtyards and riads kind of everywhere with a lot of landscaping inside. The thing that really got to us about Morocco was just the art and the artisans and the craft. I mean, just beautiful, spectacular stuff in the markets that you find. And I'll point you to this because this ended up being kind of important for us. These are metal lamps that are basically fine metal work with the light kind of pouring through. But all of this was just beautiful inspiration for not only the building, but for a lot of our interiors. We have a lot of these Zalige tiles, for instance, in the building. This building is not complete yet. It's going to open here in the next few months, so sadly I only have renderings. But this is the old part of town. Again, on the outskirts of town, there's this new neighborhood called Casa Arfaa, and it is where the old airport is. And so they've taken the runway and made it into this great connecting park, and all sorts of famous architects are building all sorts of crazy towers and things there. It's really, it's like a brand new, very exciting neighborhood. We were, I think, the first people there when we met there. There was really nothing, but it's all starting to build up right now. I show you this because this is the beginning of the explorations of our facade, and this sort of came from that idea of the metal lamps. And so we did many iterations of metal panel. We worked with metal panel manufacturer to get this sort of diagonal bend to the panel, get the perforations how we wanted them. And these studies continued all the way through with mock-ups, all the way through design and through construction to get to what we really wanted and could do. So the concept of the building is really just, it's the facade, goes all the way around here, and then inside is carved out these little either light wells or a little exercise yard or an outdoor place for staff. Or there's just various functions that are sort of carved in, and then that facade with its perforations kind of provides light where you want it, basically. Main entry is here, and then I'm going to draw your attention to that end there. One of the program elements I didn't talk about in embassies is the American Center. And this one had a really vibrant one. An American Center is where people come to learn about America. Like, I want to go to school in America. I want to go to, I want to go to Drexel and study architecture. Like, how do I do that? And so it has all sorts of resources for people to be able to engage and learn, figure out, I want a job, how do I go about doing that? In Casablanca, they had this unbelievably vibrant group, and a lot of really young people would come and just hang out here all the time. So we wanted to make sure we created a space that we could continue that here on this site. So they have a big outdoor, play yard, basically, a place to, kick a soccer ball around, as well as indoor. So this is the main entrance, and you can see some of those Liege tiles and things that we're picking up on, those courtyard motifs for the landscape. Here's our little play yard for the Dar America Center. And the consular entry, we usually try to create some shade and some seating for folks if they're waiting in consular. And this here is that space outside of the gallery where people can kind of come outside and look through the facade at the light rail going by. Okay, last one. Let's see how we're doing. Perfect. Okay, this is the last one that I'm going to talk about. This is the U.S. Embassy in Juba, South Sudan. And I'll start out right now by saying that sadly this building will likely not get built. South Sudan is a really difficult place. A difficult place to build, difficult place to be, quite frankly. And we actually never visited this site because every time we were within days of visiting, our trip would get canceled because of violence or the pandemic or some political upheaval. So we never actually got to go here. But I want to talk about it because it's really interesting study for us. It is the project where we were able to do the most in terms of resiliency. And it's a result of the fact that there's absolutely no infrastructure. So we had to build this embassy, per standards, with absolutely no infrastructure. We had to basically create our own infrastructure. So I'll try to get through, I've got too many slides here. I'll try to get through really quickly so that I can get to the infrastructure piece of it. South Sudan, newest country in the world, by the way. Here it is, Juba on the south end. You can see it's very green. It's actually a very wet, humid place. There's huge wetlands here. I'll actually show you this in a second. Beautiful, gosh, it looks like just lots and lots of beautiful. I wish I'd been able to go. Lots of beautiful spots there. And there's this Sood wetland, which is really interesting. So it's sort of semi-nomadic people, because basically when the wet season comes, they kind of hunker down into the higher ground where they have their settlements. And then as the dry season comes, they go out and they hunt, fish, gather out. So they're always kind of moving between the wet and the dry. And then so are the animals. And this is like the second biggest wildlife migration in Africa happens here in the Sood Valley. So, cool place. And hot, also hot. Bring this up just because civil war. Basically since the 50s, they have been in some form on and off of war. And we optimistically said end of war here in 2020, but unfortunately the situation is still unstable, and the folks that were building the embassy, it was under construction, had to leave the site. And so right now it's sort of awaiting a better political environment for them to be able to continue, ideally. Lots of difficult, 185 out of 189 on the development index, very young, high population growth, high maternal mortality. Many tribes with a few primary here, but this is part of the reason for the conflict. There's just lots and lots of different peoples in this place trying to figure out how to live together. Again, some traditional clothes and customs of the Dinka, the Bari, and the Nuer. Some really gorgeous handicrafts and some of the vernacular architecture. These I love these. These are in the wetland areas, so they've popped up their living like we do, I guess, in floodplains. And then we looked at architecture. Juba itself it's not a great town, honestly, for architecture. But we did look at some architecture in Africa, and I wanted to point if you're interested, Francis Carré is an architect doing some really lovely work in Africa. So he's probably kind of the best known, doing some really nice modern work. And then Miriam Kamara here was our local architect, actually went to the University of Washington, was our local architect in Niamey, and she's also doing some really nice, lovely work in Africa, so if you're interested. Okay, site. The site is on the edge of town. Surprise, surprise, it's on the outskirts of town, just like every other one. And it is near this really amazing land formation called Jebel Kujer, and it has these great rock outcroppings. And basically, this will come in useful later, but basically this is a very rocky area. So the rock outcroppings are really just the fact that there's rock underneath. There's rock underneath all the soil as well, which has some issues with water. Here's the site, Jebel Kujer, right there. You can see very informal development that is just like rapidly. I mean, there was nothing there a while ago, so it's rapidly expanding. That city is growing incredibly quickly. Okay, so here we go. No power, no water infrastructure, no stormwater infrastructure, no waste or recycling infrastructure. So the way people get their water in this city is they take it out of the White Nile River and in trucks, and they truck it around the city. And there are just hundreds of water trucks all over the city all the time delivering water to people. Power, again, there's a nascent grid that is just beginning right now. And it's all septic, basically. And I told you it's all rocky underneath. So it's really a challenging location from a water and a sanitation standpoint. So, of course, we were like, well, great, that's sort of a huge opportunity, right? What could we do here? And could we do something here that could show people what you could do anywhere, right? I mean, you have to do it here because those are the conditions, but this is an opportunity, right, to see how can you create a place that is self-sustaining this way. So, optimizing the use of photovoltaics, obviously, and looking for how to optimize the groundwater that's there. There's not much. There was not enough. The wells were not producing enough. So we knew we needed to collect every little bit of water off of every roof that we had in order to get where we needed to go. So photovoltaic system here with battery backup, future connection to the grid. We were able to show the director at OBO that if we made that investment in photovoltaics, which was a lot, I mean, basically every surface is covered, they would go from having to use 21 200-gallon drums of diesel to 2.5. And you have to know that they have to, it's a landlocked country, they have to bring that diesel fuel through other conflict zones to get there. So it's a huge risk for them to be that reliant on that much fuel being delivered. And then same story for the water, basically. We've got some groundwater. We're taking as much storm water and rainwater as we can. Mechanical condensate as well. We're using that as much as we can. And this was the first time we were able to convince OBO that they needed to reuse their water. So they have been their wastewater treatment plants are difficult to maintain, right? And so they are very nervous about that. But in this particular situation, and I'll show you they determined that it was worth it to think about the reuse of that water. So this was what we showed them in terms of what the impact would be. So 36 of these trucks of water every day. They would be there all day long just emptying water out of these trucks in order to provide enough water for the facility that they had. And so we were able to basically tell them, we can pretty much, you probably need a truck every once in a while, but we can pretty much do this. The problem, actually, surprisingly, was on the wastewater side, because although we were treating all of that wastewater, because of all the rock, we couldn't infiltrate it. There was just nowhere to infiltrate that water to. So they will still need to truck that many trucks of water off-site after they've done everything they can with it. So these were super important graphics and stories to be able to tell, for us to be able to get to a result where, basically this whole facility, it's a huge site, is pretty much independently operating and resilient. 3 concepts. These were our 3 concepts. We had a courtyard concept. We had one concept where really we were just totally orienting towards the view of the Jebel Kujer, and we had one where we had this unifying roof with all these little different buildings underneath it. We were kind of jonesing for the village, but we got the courtyard. It's okay. We did our best with it. It's actually a pretty good solution anyway. One of the reason this facility is as big as it is because OBO typically leases residential units for their folks. And unfortunately, in this location, they did not anticipate a time when that would be a safe thing to do. So we have a housing block here with a couple hundred units of housing. So, let's see, oops. Housing, courtyard, office building, another courtyard linking these, and then those rock outcroppings I told you about, they're in this garden that we've developed. And then in the back are all the service, I didn't tell you that they also have like shops and warehouses and all the stuff you would need to support this group of people is there. Some recreation spaces. And so all of those are kind of in this, tucked away back there. And so this is the main entry. This looks out at Jebel Kujer. This is the 2-story gallery that you see right here. So these people are looking out at the Jebel Kujer. And this is that courtyard in between the office building and the residential. There's some dining facility over to the right. And then here is what our landscape architects helped us do with this area where these rock outcroppings. We're also collecting a lot of water in here as well, and we're using that as well from a stormwater standpoint. And so, I have a little conclusion if I can find it. What am I doing? Oh, right on time. Okay. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the design excellence era here at OBO. So this has been an incredibly prolific and important era for OBO. And I've showed you my projects here, but OBO has hired a stable of really unbelievable and amazing U.S. architects that are designing these facilities all over the world. That includes Kieran Timberlake, of course, here locally, ENIAC, Richard and Kennedy, SHOP, CGF, Morphosis. I mean, the list goes on. They've hired some really, really excellent architects. And since the implementation of design excellence, there have been a few little pendulum swings with, oh, that's super expensive, do we need to spend that much? Or, like there's been a little bit of pendulum swing, but for the most part, OBO has been really consistent in its expectations for secure, yet representative, sustainable, and resilient facilities. 20 years after OBO was created to replace those unsecure facilities I talked about across the globe, much of that work is now complete. And so they are anticipating a slowdown in the amount of work that they're doing because they feel like they've gotten to a pretty good place with the mandate that they were given. We'll see whether that's the case or not. At any rate, we have been incredibly proud to have been part of this portfolio of work and to bring our approach of cultural and environmental responsiveness to it. And I really think we're going to look back at the buildings completed following the implementation of design excellence as an era of embassy design comparable with that post-war era I was talking about before. But time will tell. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Fascinating, sure. We have a few minutes for questions. Are there any? We just have these microphones that Ulrika and Elisa will run around for you just so we can capture the question. If you don't mind, please.
Thank you for the lovely lecture. I want to ask you a contemporary political question.
No, those are off limits. I'm sorry. Were you told on the way in?
No, they're not. Given that the president at the end of his first term, issued that thing about our federal building should now be neo-traditional, have you heard of any similar movements coming out of the government this time regarding the design of embassies and consulates?
So there is not anything regarding the design of embassies and consulates, but there was an executive order about style and federal architecture. But I believe it was limited to buildings in Washington, D.C. And so, yeah. So far, we are, another important thing to say is that the federal government is very big. And we've gone through 3 administrations throughout this work. And what I've noticed is it takes quite a long time for any one administration's sort of vision to make its way down to what we're doing on the ground. So, the short answer is I have no idea what this is going to mean and whether that's going to relate to anything that OBO does or not.
I'm sure you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear it.
I wanted to, I was curious, I couldn't help but think about the development of the systems that you're talking about in these sort of developing countries. And I was curious if you guys considered the weight of political conflicts in these regions and how much it affects the feasibility of some of these more complex infrastructure systems that you're proposing.
Yes, and that is the constant dilemma because it's not even so much the political situation, it's just the very real issue that some of the systems we might be implementing, there may not be skilled trained people who understand how to operate those systems. And so that was one of the reasons why we couldn't get an approval on water use until that very last project, when they really had to make a commitment to have staff. The facilities folks had to have commitment to have trained staff there. They couldn't rely on local contractors to be able to maintain those systems in that location. So that's really it's more about what kind of skilled labor is in that location, and will they be able to maintain what we've put in, and if not, do we have kind of a fallback position for that?
All right. Nope. All right. So, noticing for a lot of your projects, you're essentially advocating for greener building, which is a big push now based on how our climate is going, how everything is going. But in addition to that, you're pushing for like humanitarian efforts, such as like having those waiting areas for people who are coming into consulate services, stuff like that. I know for like facilities and things for like the government, security is always a huge issue. The budget is always like going there. So how do you really like convince the government itself to say you need to stop and focus also on adding in these aspects to it, thinking about like how are people going to sit and wait here? How are we going to make sure that we have enough water? How are we like taking care of the environment, the people, and the faculty at these facilities?
Yeah, well, I think I'd like to say that in many instances, it didn't take a whole lot of convincing, only in that the Design Excellence Program, as an example, is a way to start to have these conversations. There are, so OBO is unique because, again, they are building in these different locations, and so you're always able to bring the challenges of the location to the discussion. They don't want to be bad neighbors. This is the State Department. Like they're interested in being good diplomats. They want to make friends with the people that they're with the people in that location, and so they are looking for ways for us to reflect and represent the local people. And I remember one story that there's an embassy in Rabat. When we were in Casablanca, they were actually like they were doing a whole project to add some local tiles into the embassy in Rabat because it didn't look like it belonged there, and they were kind of embarrassed it looked so American, and they just felt like we should have something that talks to who our host country. I mean, they call it a host country. They're hosting us here. So that can be a tool that we can use to really lean into and to kind of do the right thing. But the federal government has been leaders in sustainability for quite some time. It just sort of depends on who you're talking to at the moment. I don't know if that's a good enough answer, but.
Hello. Thank you for your lecture. It's lovely. My question is similar about security. In the beginning of the lecture, you're showing the first responses to addressing security, and they're showing pretty closed off buildings, and then this new response, which is taking into consideration. And in your projects, there's these open spaces, and I see some like signs of security control with gates, and I'm just curious, like what are the design routes that you're typically thinking about implementing to balance the openness and the protection at the same time? Is it siting mostly? Is it actual structures and separations? Like what are you typically considering?
Well, it's a little bit of all of that, right? But what it really comes down to is, as always, is cost, honestly. Because one of the most expensive things you can do in this environment is glass, because secure glass is very expensive. And so being very judicious about that use of glass, understanding where you can be solid and where you don't need to be glazed is always, that's something we're thinking about as a firm anyway from a sustainability perspective as well, because I come from the Northwest, lots of glass. So how do we do what we want to do with less of that? So there's glazing and versus solid. As you mentioned, there's setback distances. There's different. Security. They always talk about the onion. There's layers of the onion, right? You go into this zone and then this zone and then this zone. All of that stuff is very prescribed. They have experts that know how to do this, and so we are following their lead. But then we're always kind of pushing a little bit, like, hey, how about if we tried it this way? Will that work? And then it's kind of like, well, you could do it that way if you did this. So I think what you're going to see out of this body of work, not just our work, but this whole body of work, is a bunch of different architects answering that question differently. Like, how do we make this? And you'll see a lot of screens. That's kind of a common and kind of easy thing to do. But I think you'll see a lot of creative solutions to those questions.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So you mentioned for observing these cultures. I was kind of really curious about that process. I was wondering, like, what have you deemed like a very effective method for observing other cultures? How does you as an outsider like, really try to absorb this in such a short time span? Like, do you have any like effective methods? I don't even know if effective is the right word, but
Yeah, it's time, you know. I mean, these trips are, there's so many demands and constraints on your time. So it's really finding that time. I think the best, you know, what we did in Niamey was really, we just spent a day getting driven around by the motor pool guy, you know, who was a super nice guy, and we had a great day together, and we were just like, take us somewhere, you know. And it wasn't so much, like sometimes we'll go see a museum or something like that, but really it's more about just kind of touring around and seeing how people live and seeing kind of what a regular neighborhood looks like and understanding what the crazy traffic patterns are or whatever, what kind of issues people deal with on a daily basis. So I think it's more about spending some time just immersing yourself in regular places and less so kind of studying the culture of a place. I found that to be much more valuable, especially when we're talking about things like inspiration for, you know, design, interiors, or things like that. It just feels much more authentic to just kind of see kind of what people are doing and how they live. So having a local architect is really key, so somebody you know, because then you can also say, hey, you know, where's a great place for tacos, or, you know, whatever it is that you want to kind of learn about. You know, like when we did a consulate in Merida, and they have all these cenotes there, which are like these underground caverns with water. I mean, they're just gorgeous, you know. So it's like, yeah, let's see some cenotes. You know, you just kind of you cram in as much as you possibly can. But I think really just going to more authentic places is the best way to do it.
Hi, yeah, I had some questions about the like level, like this scale is huge. How many people kind of do you have working like from your team versus from like the federal team versus the host country? Like what does that really look like?
You mean working on the project itself?
Developing it,
Developing, yeah. So, you know, OBO has a whole cast of subject matter experts. So they've got a mechanical engineer, a landscape architect, you know, so they all kind of dovetail with ours. So, so they're kind of working together in their own little way. From our office, our teams are probably anywhere from, you know, the 6 to 10 kind of range, something like that. It depends how quickly we're being asked to do it, quite frankly. But yeah, we always need to have some people that are working on, they always want to see renderings, you know, like all the time. So we've got to have some people working on the design and some people working on just generating, keeping up with the renderings and keeping everybody kind of understanding what the thing's looking like. Yeah, so it's a big team. Yeah.
Thank you.
And because, you know, you have all these different buildings as well, because it's not just one, you know, so you have you'll have a couple of people working on all the support buildings, and you have, so, and you, so, yeah, so I should explain how these are delivered, because it's an important component of that answer. They're delivered to design, build, bridging, so we develop the bridging document, so we take it to about a design development level. I say design development plus because we want to get all of the stuff that we really want to see executed. We want to make sure that stuff is detailed so it gets executed the way we want it to be executed. If we don't care so much, we let the design build team will complete that. So some projects are done design build, but every one of ours has been design build bridging. So usually that process you'll have maybe a few months to do a due diligence study, and then you'll probably have a year maybe to do the bridging. Our first project, we had 6 months from the day we got the contract to the day it had to be done. So that was like chaos. So that's why it's a little clunky building, but you know, we got there.
Yeah. Thank you for the great lecture. I have 2 questions that are very related. You mentioned the difficulty in getting things like fuel to these sites. When it comes to construction, how do you go about getting the sheer quantity of all these materials to the site? And once they're at the site, how do you go about actually building these? Do you hire local contractors? Do you bring in American contractors? How do you go about that?
Well, fortunately, that's not my job. But I do know quite a bit about it. There really are only a few contractors that do this work. It is really challenging, as you can imagine. Like even just the labor laws in different countries, you know, what are holidays that people disappear for harvest for 3 months? And then, you know, I mean, there's all sorts of things that you have to think about. And so the contractors that do this really know their stuff. And interestingly, they have different approaches. One of them has an approach where they subcontract with regional contractors, regional subcontractors, so they don't have a whole lot of local labor. They don't have a whole lot of like local labor. They might get people from Turkey. They'll get a construction company from Turkey that will do all of their, you know, facade work or whatever. There's another group that hires all local, and they just show up and they have people that they train on the site. You know, so for instance, people in Niamey, there were people who had just come from the project that they had completed. The best of the people from that location elsewhere in Africa, they're like, hey, do you want to come and work on the one in Niamey? They come and they help train the locals that are there. So there's a sort of continual kind of acquiring of skilled labor. So that's another kind of benefit of some of these projects, and I know that OBO talks about, is that they're really elevating the skilled labor in the region by doing these projects. So there's different ways that different contractors do it, and you're right to think about it because it's really complicated. Some stuff needs to come from the US, some stuff can come from wherever.
One last question over here, please.
That'd be a good one. Thank you for being here. You said the C word for the first time a few answers ago, costs. So I'm just curious how budgeting works when it comes to this process once you win a bid. I mean, surely when you get to the stage of 3 proposals, they're not the exact same cost. So what's the arithmetic, what's the thinking behind why to spend more or why to spend less? I'd love to hear from the perspective of the government.
Well, wait a minute, sorry, what, the cost for what? You weren't talking about a contractor bidding, were you? Or were you talking about the 3 concepts? I'm sorry, I'm confused.
The 3 concepts.
The 3 concepts, okay. Yes, we do estimates for all 3 concepts. And, you know, sometimes they're a little bit different, you know, based on certain things. That's usually not the driver, just because it's not usually that much different, to be honest. You know, OPO has a whole bunch of cost folks. We have our cost folks. Honestly, I'm not an expert on this. I have no idea what it costs to do these facilities, but it is expensive. And we are given a target budget in the beginning of the project, and we do have to meet that. And so that's when we talk about things like, did that really need to be, you know, a glass wall? You know, how can we do that differently? Or, you know, they won't let you mess with the program. The program is the program. You need to sort of make that happen, no matter what. But, you know, we'll look for maybe some systems ideas or civil ideas that can bring the cost down. But, and then it goes out to bid. But they're usually pretty, I mean, they're usually pretty realistic about what it's going to cost. It's not, you know, we have to be conservative, but, you know, they understand that, they understand what it costs. They're not new at this, so.
All right, thank you so much.